Hi, everybody. Lynn Burkhead of MajorLeagueFishing.com, sitting alongside one of the most popular anglers out there, Marty Robinson. And Marty, you like to skip jigs. We want to talk about that a little bit. That's something that I should know how to do because I live around Lake Texoma. There's a lot of docks to skip jigs around, but it's just not my go-to technique. But it is something you do very well. So enlighten me. First of all, why do you skip a jig?
The main reason I skip a jig a lot, the part of the country that I'm from, a lot of our lakes have a lot of boat docks, just a ton of shallow water cover, but mainly boat docks is probably the primary cover on the lake. And, to me, the best approach to a boat dock, a lot of times you can't get close enough to really be efficient in flipping the docks without spooking the fish. And,
right.
So, me, I try to stay back off of them and just do a little short underhand roll cast and skip the bait under the docks. And, in my mind, I visualize, if a fish is sitting under a dock, especially in warm water conditions. And a lot of times if you set a bait in the water quietly, which you would do flipping a jig or some kind of soft plastic, where if you set the bait in, a lot of times it'll fall right in front of the fish and it won't really trigger the fish into striking it. But I feel like a lot of times a natural sound for a fish trying to get away or something chasing is something skipping across the top.
Right.
Like if a bluegill's running from something or any kind of injured fish, maybe, scurrying across the top. And that's the idea I have when I'm presenting my jig under a dock. I want that bait skipping across the dock. So if you have a fish here and he hears something skipping across the dock, he's looking around and then bam, the bait falls in front of him and it triggers.
Just almost can't help himself.
Yeah, it just triggers that, instinct in him to, that there's something wounded, trying to get away. And once it falls right in front of their face, they can't help it.
I would think one of the reasons that skipping proves to be so successful is a lot of docks are pretty big, and like you were talking about, it's easy to flip a regular jig around the edges, around the posts, around the corners. There's 5, 10, 15 feet back up under that dock. There's a big toad sitting back in there. If you could ever get a bait back in there to him, and skipping a jig is a way that you do that, you really get to fish unpressured fish. They just don't see a lot of baits when they sit so far back up in there.
Yeah, that's probably the next biggest reason for skipping docks. When you got a dock that's got a slip and, you may have a 4 to 6 inch gap, a lot of guys can only flip so far back under there. But if you get a good underhand roll cast on a semi-calm day, you don't have a lot of ripple on the water. The more the ripple, the tougher it gets to present your bait farther back up under the docks. But if you have a kind of a calm, not the surface of the water is not broke up as much, and a lot of times that'll push the fish farther back up under the docks, and so you need to be able to get that bait way up under there, and that underhand roll cast and the skipping technique is the best way to get that bait 10, 12 foot back up under there.
Let's talk about what jig you use to skip. I'm gonna bet there's some that just probably are too heavy to get it done properly. What jigs do you use? What size? What shape, heads, and what colors do you like to throw?
Well, yeah, you're exactly right. But, a lot of people are kind of have a misconception. A lot of times the heavier the jig, the harder it'll be to skip, which is really not the case up to a certain weight. Obviously you get a 1 ounce jig, yes, it may be harder to skip. But
right.
A 1/4 ounce jig is real difficult. I never ever skip a 1/4 ounce jig. It's just too light. You can't really get it to load your rod. And if you can't get something to load the rod, you can't control that cast, and you can't get a good roll cast out of it. So, to tell you the truth, I probably skip a 1/2 ounce jig more than I do a 3/8. But
okay.
A 1/2 ounce is just perfect. And, it's a little heavier weight, but a jig is bulky. It has a lot of buoyancy because of the skirt and whatever trailer that you put on it. And it really helps, keep the bait above the water. It's kind of like, skipping a rock. And one of the jigs, the best jig or the jig that I probably skip the most, Buckeye Lures makes a flat top. It's called a flat top finesse jig.
Right.
And it's a, it's a smaller profile, you know, it's probably better in clear water. And a lot of times when you're skipping, trying to stay way back off the fish, the water is fairly clear.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it has a flat top on it. So I think when it hits the water, it's kind of like a flat rock. It helps it skip, you know, the farther back under there. And, you know, I just a half ounce green pumpkin purple is probably my number one color with like a little creepy crawler zoom twin tail trailer.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it works real great. It has a good swimming action, mimics a bluegill, and is really effective on a lot of the clear lakes.
Talk to me about the rod, the reel, and the line that you're going to be using this on.
Well, the rod is probably the most important key, rather than the reel or line or what have you. The rod, to me, the best one. You know, I use a Castaway 7-foot heavy action rod.
Mm-hmm.
And the heavy action, obviously, you have to use a heavy action when you're fishing a half-ounce jig, because you know you got to be able to feel the bait, and you got to be able to work the bait and get a hook set in the fish. So I use a 7-foot Castaway heavy action Invicta series, and you know, the reel's not that important, but you know, I use all lose reels, and I would say maybe stay toward your higher gear ratio. Because if you skip that bait in there and the fish grabs it on the fall, you need to be able to take that line up relatively fast, you know. So I would say a 6.4 to 1 or 7.2 to 1, or you know, something with a higher gear ratio. And I just use the Lew's speed spool, and you know, I guess, you know, the more smoother the reel is, the easier the line comes off. So obviously that'll probably help your skipping too. And I usually got it with, you know, some 15-pound fluorocarbon, something around the 15 to maybe 20-pound range, you know, unless the water's super clear. I lean toward the 15. But I generally have to stay 15 or heavier. I've went to 12 with a heavy action rod, and you know, 2 out of 3 hook sets you'll break off on the hook set. But once you go to the 15-pound line with a heavy action rod, you know, you don't have any problem.
Talk to me about the retrieve. How are you bringing it back?
What I do, you know, I come up to the dock and I get a nice, good roll cast and skip it way back under there as far as I can, kind of set it in the water easily. And I let it, you know, I watch my line for that initial bite. When the bait enters the water, just like I'm saying, it triggers the fish a lot of times. And if you don't get a bite, you know, I'll lift it just to see, make sure there's nothing on it, instead of hopping it. A lot of times you go hopping it that first time. If one's got it, you hop it, you do it like a semi-hook set.
Right.
And if the fish feels it, he's going to spit it out. And so I'll lift it and kind of weigh the bait, lift it a little bit, and then if there's nothing there, I'll kind of hop it once or twice in case he's looking at it, to get him to really react on it. Hop it once or twice, and then pretty much, you know, I just get it back in and pitch to the next place, or skip to the next place.
One thing I would think would come into play and would be important, since you're flipping around boathouses and docks and that kind of thing, your line's going to get nicked quite a bit. So I would think you'd probably be wanting to do things like check your line, make sure your hook the point hasn't gotten dulled. Are there little things like that up your success rate?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you got to pay attention to your line, and you know, I would say after every fish catch, you know, it doesn't matter what I'm doing, what technique or what I'm doing. After every fish catch, I will kind of inspect my line and maybe pull on it, give it a good pull, and see if, you know, if you have any nicks. Usually, you know, you'll see it, or it'll actually break when you check it. And but just check it, you know, after every fish is probably the best thing to do, that I would say.
Is there a time of the year that this technique really shines?
Yeah, I would say the best time of the year. Actually, 2 times of the year. You know, obviously it's when the fish are on docks, which to me, pre-spawn is a great time. You know, if you got the right docks on the right little channel bend, you know, the fish will start moving up, and they'll actually stop under those docks. And you know, a jig's a good cold water bait, and but I also catch them great in the fall with the same technique. You know, a lot of times the fish are suspended in the fall, but with that skipping action, you'll get those reaction strikes.
One last question. Great interview, great advice on skipping a jig. You're kind of an expert on doing that. Is there one fish that sticks out in your memory above all the others when it comes to using this technique?
Yeah, you know, We talking about a certain size fish?
Well, a certain size, maybe one that was a key fish in a tournament,
Gotcha.
maybe one that was just fun fishing that was big. Just something that when Marty Robinson thinks about skipping a jig, this is something he thinks about a lot.
Yeah, what I was saying earlier. Always pay attention to your line when you skip the bait in there. Well, I can remember one particular fish. I skipped my bait under there, and I don't know if I, had a phone call or whatever. I had something to distract my mind, and I didn't notice the fish, had ate the bait when it entered the water. And so, once I got done doing whatever I was doing, I engaged my reel, and I started reeling up some of the slack line. Well, I noticed my line was just laying all over the water. So obviously I knew a fish had it. So I wind down, and I set the hook, and the fish is on the other side of the boat. Comes up and jumps, about a 7-pounder, and spits my jig out. So, that's the price you have to pay if you're not paying attention to every cast or every skip. But, everybody has those scenarios happen to them on the water. Just, the 1 second that you are not paying attention, that's when it's going to happen.
Folks, even the pros have moments like that. But if you want to learn to be a professional level angler like our Major League Fishing pros, go to MajorLeagueFishing.com. You'll get great tips from guys like Marty Robinson. Visit MajorLeagueFishing.com.